So
Um,
let's talk about interchain security. Okay.
sure. So this is one of the
So
core components of Atom 2.0, interchain
yeah,
security.
yeah. So really, what it is, right, is it's supposed to solve this problem of like if you have your Cosmos hub and it doesn't do anything because it doesn't have a virtual machine, it doesn't support smart contracts. How do you potentially make things like liquid staking happen? Right? You need some kind of logic on top of that blockchain that is keeping track of like the staked atom in order to make liquid staking happen. And so one way that you could do it is like introduce smart contracts, introduce WASM to there was a proposal to do this to throw CosmWasm onto the Cosmos Hub, which is their like virtual machine, right? Somewhere like
It's their
EVM.
version of the EVM, yeah.
Yeah. But it didn't pass. And it was kind of like it was set aside in favor of instead having this like slightly more modular design where you can have the hub on like doing its thing, and then you can have other chains that have the same validator set as the hub doing their things as well. So interchain security is really a way that you can spin up a blockchain that uses the same exact validator set as the Cosmos Hub.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So it really solves this problem of if you want to launch a chain using all of these tools that Cosmos is providing, it's not that easy to bootstrap a network of validators who are going to stake your token and provide that security and make it sufficiently decentralized.
Your token might not be worth anything.
Exactly.
Is the bigger issue, right? So there's two things that it's trying to solve here. The first is this like notion of like you might want to add features to the Cosmos Hub, but like you don't want to fuck it up, right? Like you know you can instead just like have those validators validate another chain, right?
Yeah.
And that's really more for like core Cosmos like contributors, right? Things like liquid staking, like just like native protocol things, right? Then there's another notion, which is that like, okay, like if I'm spinning up a blockchain, this is what you were talking about, right? If I'm spinning up a blockchain, like it's hard to bootstrap that. It's hard to bootstrap a validator set. You either wind up running it yourself or like, raising a bunch of money from VCs who will then validate for you, right? Usually your foundation operates a few of the validators. It's certainly true on Polygon. It's, I believe true on Avalanche, right? And so instead what you could do is say, hey, look, like, I would love to just like pay someone for this security. So I have a native token and I'm willing to pay people like transaction fees or whatever in order to like validate my chain for me and provide me with that security. Today, the way that it looks is you have the exact same validator set as the Cosmos Hub. So that every validator on the Cosmos Hub has to opt in. It basically needs to be a protocol level thing, right? Because it needs to be the case that like everyone who's validating the Cosmos Hub is also validating every other chain. It's so that's like one interesting distinction from something like Avalanche, where on Avalanche you can be a subset, right?
I see.
And I want to say maybe, I think they're even spinning up a version where like you don't even have to validate the main chain at all. On Polygon, you don't validate the main chain at all with their like modular or with their like app chain product, right?
Okay.
On Cosmos, everyone's validating everything.
Yeah, I see. So right now, like, okay, so you brought up Avalanche, you brought up Polygon, brought up Cosmos, right? What's going on is there's this kind of push towards this more modular blockchain kind of design, right? Where there is maybe one main chain or one main hub that, is a ledger that tracks all assets on, the main chain. And that provides security in some way. But then there are a bunch of other chains because you want a ton of different applications and they may not all be suited to run on the main chain or to, maybe you don't need that level of security, whatever the case may be. You want these other kind of blockchains that are able to have security from the main chain, but can run, their computations elsewhere. And so everybody's kind of pushing towards this. Avalanche has subnets. Polygon has supernets.
Cosmos has Cosmos zones,
has Cosmos zones, right?
But,
so there's Yeah. So go
Well,
ahead.
so one distinction I would make, right, is that like today, none of these things actually share any security from the main chain, other than like Cosmos zones that are IBC enabled, right?
Okay.
And even those, it depends on how you're going to define security, right? But if you're IBC enabled, but like your validator set starts like forking the chain or something, there's nothing that then you don't really get any security from the Cosmos hub, right? Like it still
I
comes
see.
down to it comes down to the strength of that validator set, right?
Okay. And so this
Um,
is way more of a future state situation
yeah, and
where they're
like Polygon's vision isn't that either. Like I would call it more of like an app chain thing where like it actually is like a standalone, much more similar to where Cosmos zones are today.
okay. Got it. I
Yeah.
see. And in fact, like, in a way, like Ethereum is moving this way as well with all these different layer twos.
Yeah.
Ethereum being the main chain or the hub, and then all these layer twos being different zones or like whatever subnets, whatever different blockchains.
Yeah.
That's kind of the parallel.
And the model there does inherit security from Ethereum. That's like one important thing, right? Like with 90 asterisks after that sentence, but like it
So I was
does.
gonna say that is a whole different podcast, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, how much does it share security?
Oh,
Like
that's
we
a
can get
great podcast.
into.
Let's do layer
Yeah,
twos next time. Yeah.
yeah, we'll do
Um,
layer twos.
but
Okay, so that's kind of the vision here, though. That's like what they're building for. That's why interchain security is such a core piece of it as well. In a way, that's what distinguishes Cosmos from something like Polygon or like Avalanche or something else as well.
yeah. I mean, I would say that like interchain security is really interesting because it's necessary for a lot of the other parts of Cosmos 2.0, right?
Mm,
And it's been in the roadmap forever. And like when you talk to Cosmos people, it's like it wasn't initially clear that there would even be demand for that from like blockchain developers. Like they were, a lot of the devs were thinking about it like mostly as like an internal feature that like they would use because you have to have every validator agree to validate every chain that gets added, right, with this shared security. So it's not
yeah,
everyone was thinking about it like, oh, we don't want to touch the we don't want to touch the hub, but we could just like use the same validator set to like do this other thing too.
mm,
That was more, I think, the flavor that they thought it would take. And so it'll be interesting to see like, I think the vision is to eventually relax that assumption that it's exactly the same validator set. Like maybe it's a subset who can opt in, maybe it's a mix set. There's even like they call it a security mesh or mesh security, where you have
mm,
like whole bunch of chains and they're each kind of providing a little bit of security to each other.
I see.
Um, you know, hard to know exactly how that's going to work. But at least for the features that we're talking about like today, it kind of does need to be the same exact validator set, right? So
And is that real
mhm.
quick? One point on that, is that going to limit the number of validators that can be on the hub that can validate Cosmos? That can validate
So
the
this is where
chain.
it gets really interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is, I think, one of the more interesting aspects to think about. So, you wonder what about scalability, right? Like, is this going to inherently limit? Like, is there a maximum number of chains that the same validator set
Right.
can
Exactly.
enable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the answer is maybe.
Yeah, so I was going
So
to say both scalability and decentralization, right? Like it's kind of going to really
look, the core
make
issue
that
with decentral
trade-off very, very clear, right?
the,
Like,
the core issue with decentralization and Tendermint, right, is Tendermint, right? So Tendermint
hmm
itself like limits you to the number of validators that you're able to have.
yeah, which is what, like
Uh,
175 right now?
it's 175 right now, yeah. And the idea is, if you think about the graph, right, of validators, they each need to like cross communicate, and everyone needs to kind of understand every block in order for that instant finality to happen, right? Everyone needs to reach consensus once the block is produced, right? Before the next block is produced.
Mm,
So there's so much cross communication going on that like you're inherently limited by where are the validators, what's the data latency, how much data is being passed through. You can imagine if each block was a gigabyte, it wouldn't be possible for all of that information to cross communicate across all of the validators in a 3-second block time. You would have to slow down the blocks. So does that make sense, right? Like, so the decentralization part, that I would say is like really the core issue. Now, if you think about scalability, though, I find this really interesting. You have your main chain, you have your hub. It's being validated by 175 validators. Okay. You have your other hub. And what is a validator really doing? They're like running a server in a data center somewhere, and it's talking to these other servers. You can have another server. Everyone can have another server, right? Just like validating all of that stuff too, right? It just needs to be like the same validator operating it. And then if there's a third chain, they can add another server. And so each of these things can be its own discrete thing, right? And the only cross communication that needs to happen is IBC related transactions. And so to the degree that that's scalable, then you're good.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And it doesn't, in terms of actual cost, right? Will that, if there are an abundance of blockchains, right? Like, does that make the cost prohibitive to start launching these chains because you have to validate each one, or like what is?
Yeah, so each chain needs to make it worth the validator's while, right? So, it's not super expensive to run a, Tendermint based like proof of stake, right?
Yeah.
It's,
very
probably hundreds of dollars
GPUs
a year, right?
or what?
You can use, it's not even a GPU at all, right? It's like you could use a Raspberry Pi for like, there are people, staking on ETH that are running Raspberry Pis, right?
Yeah.
And then it's just like a little bit of electricity, right? So it's not that expensive from an electrical perspective. Someone does have to pay them, right? And that gets a little bit complicated because basically the hub needs Cosmos is all about putting stuff on chain. Like that's their core thing. Like, especially in Atom 2.0, it's like, let's get everything on chain, right? So one thing that they're trying to put on chain is like the currency conversion rates of like how much of a given. So let's say you and I want to like launch our, decent chain, right? And we want to inherit the security we want Interchain security from the Cosmos Hub. We need to pay them something, right? We could pay them USDC. We could pay them Atom if we wanted to, right? We could also pay them decent token, but they're going to need to like go in and approve like the currency exchange rate effectively, or like the minimum like fee that they're willing to accept like per block or whatever in order to actually step in and validate that.
That would be some kind of constant rate, or what?
It's governance driven, so it's got to be like, I think it's got to be like a vote for every. I mean, you can imagine it could get algorithmic, but like that's so dangerous, right? I would imagine the way it works out is it winds up being USDC. That would be my that's how I would do it, right? And then you just have to have like how much USDC do I need in order to like accept this as like a chain that I will provide security to. The reason you need to have everybody on the same page here, and you can't just have this like opt-in opt-out thing, and the reason that like the validators need to all agree that they're going to do something is because their stake can actually get slashed. Their stake can get on the hub can get slashed by any of the like consumer chains, right? So decent chain, if it gets approved and someone like messes with the consensus on our chain, we can slash them, and that slash will be like honored on the main Cosmos Hub.
I see.
So it gets like really like, I don't want to say centralized, but it's effectively like not very flexible, right? Where it really does have to be every validator validating every child chain or every inheriting chain. None of this was financial advice, legal advice, investment advice, or any other kind of advice. If you're looking for advice, you are definitely in the wrong place. Until next time, stay decent.